A New Dawn. The Fracture of Unity. Chapter 1. The Dawn of Victory. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the crimson sky of Terra Nova, casting long shadows across the war-scarred landscape. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Capitol Tower, watching as the human flagger, brilliant blue field with a golden star surrounded by 7 smaller stars, representing the liberated colonies, was raised. Over the Capitol building, the cheers of thousands echoed through the streets below, a symphony of hope that had been silent for too long. We did it, Sarah thought, her cybernetic eye adjusting to the morning light. We actually did it. The Dominion was no more. Their massive dreadnoughts lay scattered across the galaxy like broken toys, their once mighty fleets reduced to floating graveyards. The alien overlords who had enslaved humanity for nearly a century were either dead or fleeing to the outer rim, their empire crumbling like sand through desperate fingers. But victory, Sarah was learning, came with its own burdens. Commander. Lieutenant Evelyn Shaw's voice cut through her reverie. Sarah turned to see her aide approaching, a datapad clutched in her hands. The morning briefing is ready, the council is eager to discuss the reconstruction plans. Sarah nodded, but her gaze drifted back to the cityscape. Terra Nova had been one of the first human colonies to fall to the Dominion, its population enslaved, its cities converted into industrial complexes that fed the alien war machine. Now, construction crews worked around the clock to dismantle the towering processing plants and replace them with schools, hospitals, and homes. The skeleton of the old oppression was being torn down brick by brick, but the work was slow, and the scars ran deep. Tell me, Shaw, Sarah said quietly, what do you see when you look out there? The young lieutenant stepped beside her commander, following her gaze. Hope, ma'am, I see hope. I see a powder keg. Sarah's voice carried a weight that made Shaw's breath catch. We've won the war, but now we have to win the peace, and that might prove to be the harder battle. As if summoned by her words, the doors to the observation deck slid open with a soft hiss. General Marcus Holt strode in, his military bearing as rigid as ever, his scarred face bearing the marks of countless battles against the Dominion. Behind him walked Dr. Alina Vasquez, the brilliant scientist who had helped develop the weapons that turned the tide of the war, and Admiral James Reeves, the tactical genius who had orchestrated the final assault on the Dominion's capital. Sarah, Holt said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. We need to talk. The informal use of her first name wasn't lost on Sarah. In the old days, during the resistance, they had all been equals, desperate rebels fighting for survival. Now, with titles and ranks and the weight of governing an empire, the old camaraderie was straining under the pressure of politics. The council meeting isn't for another hour, Sarah replied evenly. This isn't about the council. Holt moved to stand beside her, his eyes scanning the city below. This is about reality. Look at them down, they're celebrating, partying, acting like the war is over. But you and I both know it's not. Admiral Reeves stepped forward, his weathered face grave. Marcus is right, Sarah. We've got reports coming in from across the galaxy. Some colonies are refusing to acknowledge the new government. Others are demanding complete autonomy. And then there are the Dominion sympathizers, who collaborated with the enemy and now fear retribution. The infrastructure is in shambles, Dr. Vasquez added, her scientific mind cataloging the problems with clinical precision. The Dominion's supply chains are broken. Food shortages are already beginning in the outer colonies. Without strong central authority, without someone to make the hard decisions, we're going to see chaos. Sarah felt the familiar knot of tension forming in her stomach. She had led humanity through the darkest days of the war, had made impossible choices that saved billions of lives. But those decisions had been clear: fight or die, resist or be enslaved. The choices facing her now were murkier, more complex. What are you suggesting? She asked. A strong hand, Holt said bluntly. Not the debating society we've planned, but real leadership. Someone with the authority to make decisions quickly, to restore order, to rebuild. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Someone like you. Lieutenant Shaw stiffened beside Sarah. Sir, with respect, we didn't fight a war against tyranny just to establish our own. Holt's eyes flashed. We fought a war to survive, Lieutenant, and if we don't act decisively now, everything we've sacrificed will be for nothing. The tension in the room crackled like electricity before a storm. Sarah could feel the fault lines forming, the first cracks in the unity that had held humanity together during the war. She had always known this moment would come, the moment when the alliance of convenience would splinter into factions, with competing visions of the future. The council will meet as planned, Sarah said finally. All voices will be heard. That's what we promised the people. Promises, Holt muttered. The Dominion made promises too. As the others filed out, Sarah remained on the observation deck, watching the sun climb higher over Terra Nova. The celebration in the streets continued, but she could already see the signs of trouble, clusters of people in heated discussion, the occasional scuffle between opposing groups, the nervous glances of the security forces. Shaw lingered behind. Commander, are you all right? Sarah turned to face her aide, seeing in the young woman's eyes the same hope and determination that had carried them through the war. Shaw, I want you to prepare a full intelligence briefing on the political situation across all liberated territories, and I want it before the council meeting. Yes, ma'am. Shaw hesitated. Ma'am, General Holt, he's not wrong about the challenges we're facing. No, Sarah agreed. But he's wrong about the solution. We didn't fight to replace one form of oppression with another. We fought for the right to choose our own path, even if that path is difficult. As Shaw departed, Sarah remained alone with her thoughts. The city below hummed with activity, but she could sense the undercurrents of discord. The war had been simple, us versus them, freedom versus slavery. Peace, she was discovering, was infinitely more complex. The golden star on the flag fluttered in the morning breeze, surrounded by the 7 smaller stars representing the liberated colonies. But Sarah wondered how long it would be before those stars began to drift apart, pulled by the gravity of their own ambitions and fears. Chapter 2. The Council of Fractured Dreams. The Grand Assembly Hall of Terra Nova had been hastily converted from a Dominion administrative center, its oppressive, black walls now painted in warm earth tones, its harsh artificial lighting replaced with gentle ambient illumination. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered for the most important meeting in human history, the founding of the new empire. Sarah Chen stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces before her. There were colony governors who had maintained hidden resistance networks, former slaves who had risen to become leaders in the underground, military commanders who had led desperate last stands, and civilian administrators who had kept communities alive through the darkest days of the occupation. Brothers and sisters, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics, we stand at a crossroads. Behind us lies a century of oppression, of darkness, of despair. Before us lies the chance to build something better, not just for ourselves, but for our children and their children. The applause was thunderous, but Sarah noticed the subtle divisions even in the crowd's response. Some stood and cheered enthusiastically, others offered more measured applause, and a few remained seated, their faces carefully neutral. The Dominion ruled through fear and division, Sarah continued. They turned us against each other, made us compete for scraps from their table, but we are not the Dominion. We will not rule through fear. We will not divide and conquer. We will build an empire based on unity, on cooperation, on the revolutionary idea that all human voices deserve to be heard. Dr. Elena Busquez, representing the scientific community, rose from her seat. Commander Chen, we all share your vision of unity, but we must also face practical realities. The Dominion's infrastructure is collapsing. Their supply networks are broken. We have colonies on the verge of starvation, others facing complete economic collapse. Unity is a beautiful ideal, but empty stomachs don't care about ideals. Sarah nodded. Dr. Vasquez raises valid concerns. That's why we must work together, work together. The interruption came from Captain Torres, a grizzled veteran from the Outer Rim colonies. With respect, Commander, you're talking about unity to a room full of people who've been fighting separate wars for decades. My people on Kepler 442b don't know the people of New Shanghai, and they sure as hell don't trust them to make decisions about our future. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Sarah could feel the careful diplomatic atmosphere beginning to fray. Governor Patricia Walsh of the Inner Colonies stood up. Captain Torres makes a fair point, but perhaps for the wrong reasons. The fact is, some colonies have contributed more to the war effort than others. Some have maintained better infrastructure, better governance. Should we all have equal say in rebuilding when our contributions have been so different? The murmurs turned to angry voices. Representatives from the Outer Rim colonies began shouting protests, while those from the more developed inner colonies nodded in agreement. Order, Sarah called out, but the damage was done. The first crack in the facade of unity had appeared. General Holt rose from his seat in the front row. If I may, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos with military precision. The room fell silent. Holt's reputation as a war hero commanded respect, even from those who disagreed with him. We're arguing about who deserves what voice while the galaxy burns around us. I've just received reports that the Vega colony has declared independence. The mining operations on Titan have shut down completely. 3 transport ships carrying medical supplies to the Outer Rim have been hijacked by raiders. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the assembly. Every minute we spend debating governance is a minute our people suffer. We need strong leadership, and we need it now. Not a committee, not a debate society, but someone with the authority to make hard decisions quickly. Lieutenant Shaw, serving as Sarah's aide, stepped forward with a datapad. Sir, if I may, the preliminary reconstruction reports show that democratic processes, while slower, tend to produce more sustainable results. The historical data from Earth's reconstruction after the resource wars, historical data, Holt interrupted, from a planet that had centuries to develop democratic institutions. We don't have centuries, Lieutenant, we have months, maybe weeks, before this fragile piece collapses entirely. Sarah felt the familiar weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. She had hoped that victory would bring clarity, that the shared experience of suffering under the Dominion would create a natural unity among humanity's survivors. Instead, she was watching that unity fracture in real time. General Holt, she said carefully, are you suggesting we abandon the democratic process entirely? I'm suggesting we prioritize survival over ideology, Holt replied. Democracy is a luxury we can't afford right now. We need a strong executive authority, someone the people trust, someone who can make decisions without having to consult a committee every time a crisis arises. The room erupted again. Representatives from the smaller colonies began shouting about dictatorship and oppression, while those from the military and larger colonies nodded in agreement with Holt's assessment. You're talking about creating another dominion, Captain Torres shouted. Just because the dictator has a human face doesn't make it any less tyranny. And you're talking about letting the galaxy collapse into chaos while we debate the finer points of parliamentary procedure. Governor Walsh shot back. Sarah raised her hand for silence, and gradually, the room quieted. I understand everyone's concerns, she said, but let's not forget what we're fighting for. We're not trying to create a government that serves our convenience or our immediate needs. We're trying to create something that will serve our children and their children. An older woman in the back of the room stood up. Sarah recognized her as Dr. Maria Santos, a former teacher who had become a leader in the underground education network during the occupation. Commander Chen, you speak of our children's future. But what kind of future are we building if we compromise our principles at the first sign of difficulty? I taught children in secret schools for 30 years. Under the Dominion, I saw what happens when people accept authoritarian rule in exchange for promises of stability. Dr. Santos, General Holt said, his voice respectful but firm. With the greatest respect for your service, teaching children and governing a galaxy are 2 very different challenges. Are they? Dr. Santos replied. Because it seems to me that both require patience, wisdom, and a willingness to trust in the better angels of human nature. The Dominion governed through fear and force. If we do the same, haven't they won after all? The debate raged for hours. Sarah watched the careful alliances she had built during the war begin to fracture along ideological lines. The military commanders generally supported Holt's position, arguing for strong central authority. The civilian leaders were split between those who feared chaos and those who feared authoritarianism. The colony representatives were divided based on their resources and their historical relationship with the central government. As the day wore on, Sarah realized that the unity she had counted on was an illusion. The war had brought them together because they had a common enemy. Now, with that enemy defeated, the underlying tensions and competing visions were rising to the surface. During a brief recess, Sarah found herself in a small conference room with her closest advisors. Lieutenant Shaw was reviewing notes on her datapad, while Dr. Vasquez studied resource allocation reports. General Holt stood by the window, his expression grim. This isn't working, Holt said bluntly. We're not going to reach consensus. Every hour we waste in debate is another hour the galaxy slides toward chaos. Democracy is messy, Shaw replied, but it's the only system that respects human dignity. Human dignity doesn't matter much when humans are starving, Holt shot back. Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of leadership like a physical burden. What are our options? We could call for a referendum, Dr. Vasquez suggested. Let the people decide between different governmental structures. The people don't have enough information to make that kind of decision, Holt argued. Most of them are just trying to survive. They'll vote for whoever promises them the most immediate relief. And you think that's you? Shaw asked pointedly. I think I'm the one willing to make the hard choices, Holt replied. Sarah, you know, me, we've fought together, bled together. I'm not seeking power for its own sake, but someone needs to have the authority to act decisively, and right now, that someone is you. Sarah looked at the faces around her, people she trusted, people she had depended on throughout the war. They were all intelligent, all dedicated to humanity's welfare, but they couldn't agree on the most basic questions of governance. What if we tried a hybrid approach, she said slowly. A strong executive authority for the emergency period, with built-in checks and balances, and a transition to full democratic governance once the immediate crisis is resolved. How long is the emergency period? Shaw asked. As long as it takes, Holt replied. That's not an answer, Shaw said. That's a blank check for authoritarianism, and your alternative is to let the galaxy burn while we debate. Holt's voice rose slightly, a rare display of emotion from the usually controlled General. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The celebrations of the morning had given way to the routine of daily life, but she could see the signs of strain: long lines at food distribution centers, crowds gathered around public information displays, the occasional patrol of security forces keeping order. We reconvene in the morning, she said finally. I want everyone to think about what we're really trying to achieve here, not just the immediate problems, but the long-term vision. What kind of society do we want to build? What kind of legacy do we want to leave? As the others filed out, Sarah remained at the window. The sun was setting over Terra Nova, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Beautiful, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching the sunset of humanity's brief moment of unity. Chapter 3. The Fracture Lines. 3 weeks after the failed council session, Sarah Chen stood in the Situation Room of the Capitol Tower, watching as red indicators flashed across the galaxy map. Each light represented a crisis, a colony in revolt, a supply chain disruption, a regional conflict that threatened to spiral out of control. The Centauri system has declared independence, Admiral Reeves reported, his voice tight with frustration. They're refusing to acknowledge the authority of the provisional government, and have established their own military command. The third system this week, Dr. Vasquez added, her scientific mind cataloging the disintegration with clinical precision. If this pattern continues, we'll have complete fragmentation within 6 months. Sarah nodded grimly. The warning signs had been there from the beginning, but she had hoped that humanity's shared experience of oppression would be enough to hold them together. She had been wrong. What about the Outer Rim colonies? She asked. Lieutenant Shaw consulted her datapad. Mixed results. Some are hanging on, waiting to see what we do. Others are already forming regional alliances. Captain Torres has been particularly vocal about the need for Outer Rim autonomy, and the inner colonies. Growing impatient, Admiral Reeves replied. Governor Walsh has been pushing for a more centralized approach. She's been in contact with General Holt's people. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. General Holt's people. He's been building a coalition, Shaw said quietly. Military commanders, colonial governors, business leaders, anyone who believes that strong central authority is the only way to prevent complete collapse. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. In fighting the Dominion, she had brought together the most capable leaders in human space. Now those same leaders were positioning themselves for a power struggle that could tear apart everything they had fought to build. Where is General Holt now? She asked. He's called a meeting, Dr. Vasquez said. Military commanders from across the galaxy is calling it a strategic planning session, but it's a coup. Sarah finished. He's building support for a military government. The Situation Room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the crisis indicators. Sarah stared at the map, watching as more lights flickered from green to yellow to red. The galaxy was fragmenting and she was running out of time to hold it together. Ma'am, Shaw said hesitantly, there's something else. We've detected unusual activity in the Dominion's former outer territories. Ships moving in organized formations, resource convoys being redirected. It's possible that some Dominion remnants are regrouping. Sarah closed her eyes. Of course, with humanity divided and distracted, the remnants of their former oppressors would try to reclaim what they had lost. The war might not be over after all. How long do we have? She asked. Unknown, Admiral Reeves replied. If they're rebuilding their fleet, maybe 6 months. If they're just trying to secure a power base in the Outer Rim, maybe longer. And if General Holt's coalition moves first, then we'll have a civil war on our hands. Shaw said quietly. And that might be exactly what the Dominion remnants are, waiting for. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at the faces around her. These were good people, dedicated to humanity's welfare, but they were also caught in the same impossible situation she was. The galaxy was too big, too complex, too fractured for any simple solution. I need to think, she said. Clear the room. Shaw, you stay. As the others filed out, Sarah moved to the window that had become her refuge. The city below was quieter now, the initial euphoria of victory fading into the reality of daily survival. She could see the construction crews working on the new housing projects, the food distribution centers with their perpetual lines, the security checkpoints that had become a necessary part of urban life. You're going to meet with him, aren't you? Shaw said. Sarah didn't need to ask who him was. I have to. If there's any chance of preventing a civil war, I have to try. He's not going to back down, Shaw warned. General Holt believes he's right, and maybe, maybe he is. Sarah turned to face her aide, seeing the conflict in the young woman's eyes. You think I should step aside? Let him take control. I think, Shaw said carefully, that you're the only person both sides trust. If you endorse his approach, the civilian leaders will accept it. If you oppose it, the military will hesitate to act against you. And if I'm wrong, if I give him the authority he wants and he becomes the very thing we fought against, then at least we'll have prevented a civil war, Shaw replied. At least we'll have given humanity a chance to survive. Sarah nodded slowly. It was a devil's bargain: trade democracy for stability, trade freedom for security. But with the galaxy fragmenting and external threats gathering, it might be the only choice that made sense. Set up a meeting, she said. Just me and Holt. No staff, no advisors. Let's see if we can find a way forward. As Shaw left to make the arrangements, Sarah remained at the window, watching the sun set over Terra Nova. The sky was particularly beautiful that evening, painted in shades of purple and gold, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching the sunset of humanity's brief experiment in freedom. The meeting was arranged for that night, in a secure conference room in the military district. Sarah arrived first, choosing a seat that would allow her to watch Holt's face as they talked. The room was spartanly decorated, with a simple table and chairs, a strategic map of the galaxy on one wall, and a portrait of humanity's first flag on another. General Holt arrived precisely on time, his military bearing as rigid as ever. He had aged visibly in the weeks since the council session, the stress of the political crisis etching new lines around his eyes, but his resolve seemed unshaken. Sarah, he said, taking the seat across from her. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting, Marcus, she replied, noting his use of her first name. We've been friends for a long time. I hope we can speak honestly. I've never been anything but honest with you, Holt said. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. Every day we delay decisive action is another day closer to complete collapse. And your solution is military rule. My solution is effective governance, Holt corrected. The military is the only institution that survived the war intact. It's the only organization that has the infrastructure, the discipline, and the authority to hold the galaxy together. Sarah leaned back in her chair. And what happens after you've stabilized the situation? Do you just give up power and return to civilian rule? When the crisis is over, yes, Holt said. But Sarah, we both know that might take years, maybe decades. The Dominion didn't just conquer our territory, they destroyed our institutions, our culture, our sense of shared identity. Rebuilding that will take time. Time during which you have absolute power. Time during which someone has to make the hard decisions, Holt corrected. Sarah, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about Earth's history, about military dictatorships and the abuse of power. But this is different. We're not seizing power from a functioning democracy. We're trying to create order from chaos. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden ambition. She saw only the same dedication and conviction that had made him one of humanity's most effective military leaders. What do you want from me? She asked. Your endorsement, Holt said simply. The people trust you. If you support this transition, they'll accept it. If you oppose it, we'll have a civil war that will destroy everything we've fought for. And if I support it, and you become a tyrant, then you'll have the moral authority to oppose me, Holt replied. Sarah, I'm not asking you to give up your principles. I'm asking you to be pragmatic. The galaxy is fragmenting. The Dominion remnants are regrouping. We need unity, and we need it now. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the city, distant traffic, the hum of construction equipment, the occasional siren, Life going on, people trying to build a future despite the uncertainty. What guarantees do I have? She asked finally. You have my word, Holt said. And you have the understanding that you'll be part of the government, not as a figurehead, but as a partner. Your voice will be heard on every major decision, and if we disagree, then we'll work it out, Holt said. Like we always have. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. The view was different from her office from here. She could see the military district, the neat rows of barracks and administrative buildings, the parade ground where soldiers drilled each morning. Order and discipline, as opposed to the chaotic energy of the civilian districts. There's something else, she said without turning around. Intelligence suggests that Dominion remnants are regrouping in the outer territories. If you're right about the need for unity, then we may face another war sooner than we think. All the more reason to act quickly, Holt said. A divided humanity can't fight a resurgent Dominion. Sarah turned back to face him. Give me 24 hours to think about it, Sarah. Every hour we delay. 24 hours, she repeated firmly. This isn't a decision I can make lightly. Holt nodded reluctantly. 24 hours. But Sarah, please consider what's at stake. Not just for us, but for every human being in the galaxy. After he left, Sarah remained in the conference room, staring at the portrait of humanity's first flag. The blue field with its 7 stars seemed to mock her, a symbol of unity that was already fracturing into competing factions and competing visions. She thought about the teachers like Dr. Santos, who had risked everything to keep human culture alive during the occupation. She thought about the soldiers who had died believing they were fighting for freedom. She thought about the children who would grow up in whatever system she helped create. The weight of the decision pressed down on her like a physical force. Support Holt, and she might be creating the very tyranny they had fought against. Oppose him, and she might be condemning humanity to civil war and eventual reconquest by the Dominion. Outside, the city slept uneasily, unaware that its future was being decided in a small conference room by 2 tired veterans who had already sacrificed more than anyone should have to sacrifice. Chapter 4. The Point of No Return. Sarah Chen stood in her private quarters, watching the first light of dawn break over Terra Nova. She had not slept. The decision that General Holt had asked her to make seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour, like a stone in her chest that made it difficult to breathe. Her personal unit chimed softly. A message from Lieutenant Shaw. Ma'am, urgent. Intelligence briefing requested. Priority Alpha. Sarah's blood ran cold. Priority Alpha meant imminent threat to humanity's survival. She dressed quickly and made her way to the secure briefing room, where Shaw was waiting with Admiral Reeves and Dr. Vasquez. Report, Sarah said tersely. Shaw activated the holographic display, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red indicators pulsed ominously in the outer territories more than there had been the day before. Long-range sensors have detected massive fleet movements in the former Dominion territories, Shaw reported. At least 3 separate battle groups, each numbering in the hundreds of ships. Dominion remnants? Sarah asked. Worse, Admiral Reeves said grimly. These aren't scattered survivors trying to regroup. The formations are too organized, too well coordinated. Our intelligence suggests they may have been planning this withdrawal and regrouping for months, possibly years. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her face pale. There's more. We've detected energy signatures consistent with Dominion breeding facilities. They're not just rebuilding their fleet, they're rebuilding their population. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The Dominion's advantage had never been just their technology, it had been their numbers. Each Dominion warrior was worth 10 human soldiers, and they could breed new generations in a fraction of the time it took humans to mature. How long do we have? She asked. If they're rebuilding for a long-term campaign, maybe 2 years, Admiral Reeves said. If they're planning a quick strike to take advantage of our division, maybe 6 months. And our current military strength, fragmented, Shaw reported. The Centauri system took their fleet with them when they declared independence. The Outer Rim colonies are forming their own defense alliances. We have maybe 30% of our wartime military strength under central command. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her. The Dominion had ruled for nearly a century before humanity had managed to mount effective resistance. If they returned while humanity was divided, the war would be over before it began. Has General Holt seen this intelligence? She asked. He's being briefed now, Shaw replied. Ma'am, this changes everything. If the Dominion is returning, we need unity more than ever. Sarah nodded slowly. The luxury of democratic debate, of carefully weighing competing visions for the future, had just evaporated. With an external threat, this severe survival trumped ideology. "Get me a secure channel to General Holt," she said, and then ... and then call a meeting of all faction leaders. Every colony governor, every military commander, every civilian leader, they need to see this intelligence. As Shaw moved to carry out her orders, Sarah remained staring at the holographic display. The red indicators seemed to pulse with malevolent life, a reminder that humanity's ancient enemy was not as defeated as they had hoped. 2 hours later, Sarah stood before the hastily assembled leadership of human space. The same faces that had argued so bitterly about governance now sat in stunned silence as Admiral Reeves presented the intelligence briefing. "The conclusion is inescapable," Reeves said, his voice heavy with foreboding. "The Dominion is returning, and they're better organized than we anticipated. If we face them as a divided species, we will lose." Captain Torres, who had been one of the most vocal advocates for Outer Rim independence, was the first to speak. How is this possible? We destroyed their fleets, their production facilities, their command structure. We destroyed what we could find, Dr. Vasquez replied, but the Dominion had 1,000 years to prepare contingencies. Hidden bases, secret production facilities, sleeper agents. They're not just aliens, they're a civilization that has survived by adapting to defeat. Governor Walsh leaned forward. "What are you saying? That our victory was meaningless?" "No," Sarah said, stepping forward. "Our victory bought us time. Time to prepare, time to unite, time to build something stronger than what we had before, but only if we act now." The room fell silent again. Sarah could see the calculations happening behind their eyes, the weighing of ideological purity against survival, of independence against unity. "General Holt," she said, turning to face her former comrade, "you've been advocating for centralized authority. Given this new intelligence, what do you propose?" Holt stood, his military bearing more pronounced than ever. "Immediate military mobilization. All colonies, all fleets, all resources under unified command. A declaration of emergency that suspends normal governmental processes until the threat is eliminated." "And who would lead this unified command?" Dr. Santos asked, her voice carrying the weight of her years of resistance to authoritarianism. "Sarah," Holt said simply, "she's the only person all factions trust. She's the symbol of our victory over the Dominion." Sarah felt every eye in the room turn to her. The moment she had been dreading had arrived, the moment when she would have to choose between her principles and her people's survival. "I need to make something clear," she said slowly. "If we do this, if we create an emergency government with centralized authority, will be temporary. There will be a clear timeline for return to civilian rule. There will be oversight mechanisms, and there will be consequences for anyone who tries to abuse the power we're creating." "Agreed," Holt said immediately. "But Sarah, we need to act now. Every day we delay is another day the Dominion uses to prepare." Captain Torres stood up. "What guarantees do we have that this emergency government won't become permanent? That we won't just be trading one set of oppressors for another?" "You have my word," Sarah said, "and you have the understanding that this government will be built on consent, not conquest. Any colony that wants to leave can leave. Any leader who objects can voice their objections. But we need unity to face this threat, and if we refuse..." Governor Walsh asked. Sarah felt the weight of the moment like a physical force. "Then we face the Dominion as a divided species, and we lose not just our freedom, but our existence." The vote was closer than she had hoped. 43 in favor, 37 against, with 12 abstentions, enough to create the emergency government, but not enough to guarantee its stability. As the meeting broke up, Sarah found herself surrounded by the leaders who had voted in favor. They were looking at her with a mixture of hope and fear, as if she might be their salvation or their doom. "Sarah," General Holt said quietly, "you've made the right choice. History will vindicate this decision." "History," Sarah replied, "will judge us all." As the crowd dispersed, Sarah remained in the assembly hall, staring at the empty seats where the opposition had sat. She had won the vote, but she had lost something else, the unity that had carried them through the war. Now she was the leader of a divided humanity, facing an enemy that had never truly been defeated. Lieutenant Shaw approached her cautiously. "Ma'am, the legal documents are ready for your signature. The emergency powers will take effect immediately." Sarah looked at the datapad Shaw offered her, such a small thing, to sign away the democratic dreams of an entire species. But the alternative was extinction, she said as she took the pad. I want you to remember this moment, not just